Hi, my name is William Nee, and I'm the Research and Advocacy Coordinator for Chinese Human Rights Defenders, or CHRD. And today I'm going to talk a little bit about human rights lawyers in China. This year celebrates the 7th anniversary of what is now known as the 709 crackdown. And this is because in July 9th, 2015, hundreds of lawyers and activists around China were rounded up in just an unprecedented crackdown on the legal profession in China. Now, at the time, I was a China researcher at Amnesty International in Hong Kong. And, my colleagues and I were being bombarded by messages all throughout the day of July 9th, 10th, and onwards of various lawyers being detained. And, it quickly became clear that this was not just related to one case in Beijing or one case in Tianjin, but it was happening in cities all throughout the country. It was affecting lawyers all around China. And eventually, over 250 to 300 activists were taken into detention, questioned by authorities. Some were criminally detained. Others were put in a secret detention system called RSDL, or Residential Surveillance in a Designated Location. And this is a form of incommunicado detention, that the UN has told China on many occasions they need to end, where the police can hold people for up to 6 months without access to family members, a lawyer, or contact with the outside world. And they're detained in a small room where there's padded walls and toothbrushes with strings on them so you can't commit suicide, and cameras everywhere. And 2 or 3 guards will guard you at all times. You will be subjected to anywhere from 12 to 18 hours of interrogation every day, and they will torture you and get you basically to cooperate. And it's just a horrific system. Many cases of torture came out of this 709 crackdown. So why did this happen? Well, according to what the government's own statement, their own framing of the issue in the People's Daily, the mouthpiece of the Communist Party, it's because they were concerned that these human rights lawyers were hyping up cases. Basically, the lawyers would take on cases and use social media and use traditional media or overseas media to bring attention to the cases and overcome any procedural hurdles that they might encounter and seek justice for their clients. And the government was concerned that this was becoming a political force. So obviously, the key issue at concern was that lawyers were using the safeguards and the protections in China's criminal procedure law to achieve justice for clients, whereas the government saw law more as a tool to control society and didn't want lawyers to use the same law to protect human rights. So that is essentially what was at issue. Now, lawyers were also, and still are, that was a unprecedented campaign. 250 lawyers, it aroused the attention of the international media, bar associations throughout the world. But it would be a mistake to think that this has ended. According to research from the 29 Principles, who looks at the situation for human rights lawyers in China, since then, there have been over 42 different human rights lawyers that have had their licenses revoked, and 3 law firms have had their licenses revoked since then. And many times this is for expressing views on social media. That's often one thing that gets people disbarred. Recently we had the case of Lin Qilei, who was a human rights lawyer who had defended human rights defenders, who had defended Tibetan clients, who had defended religious practitioners, but he also defended the Hong Kong 12. So there were 12 people who were in the pro-democracy movement in Hong Kong who tried to escape, but were intercepted by the Chinese Coast Guard. And many of the lawyers who took on these cases Lin Qilei, Liang Xiaojun, Lu Siwei, Ren Chuanyou. These are 4 different lawyers who, just by merely taking on these cases, they had their licenses revoked. So obviously this goes against the UN basic principles on the role of lawyers in stating that the government should not conflate just the fact that a lawyer takes on a case with the clients or the client's causes. But this routinely happens in China. Now, so the question is, are the lawyers free to make arguments in court? I think that depends. I mean, some lawyers have extreme difficulties getting in contact with the client. So although they should be able to see clients once they're in a detention center, oftentimes the authorities don't allow that for arbitrary reasons. This is particularly true in the last 2 years in the COVID situation. I mean, COVID has been the authorities routinely say, oh, you can't meet your client because of COVID procedures. Our city is having cases, we can't allow a lawyer from outside to come in. So COVID has provided this perfect excuse for not allowing lawyers to see their clients. They're often not allowed to read case files. So even if they are allowed to see the client, they have to go to trial without reading what the prosecution is going to say. Many times they're not allowed to make copies. So they are allowed to, let's say, go into an office, but then they will have to read hundreds of pages of case files and take handwritten notes and not allowed to copy them. So these are some of the regular procedural hurdles that lawyers will face. And if they discuss any of these problems or hurdles, if they discuss that their client was tortured often with the intent for the client to confess, if they talk about that, they risk being disbarred, having their license revoked. And the All China Lawyers Association in October of 2021 put in new rules about hyping cases in violation of the rules that made these rules even more strict for lawyers on social media. So in Hong Kong, where I used to be, this was a place where there was a lot of interaction between Hong Kongers, people in China. We had groups like the Chinese Human Rights Lawyers Concern Group in Hong Kong that was formed with the express intent of protecting human rights lawyers in China. Now, the chairman of that organization, Albert Ho, a lawyer in Hong Kong, he is now in prison or in detention in Hong Kong. And lawyers in Hong Kong have now come under tremendous pressure. And we've had human rights lawyers from Hong Kong fleeing to go abroad and state media harassing them. So the situation for human rights lawyers in Hong Kong, I think, is one of the things that the international community will really need to pay attention to in the next few years. Another great case to exemplify the situation for human rights lawyers in China is Li Yuhan. She was a lawyer who was the defense lawyer for Wang Yu, a famous human rights lawyer whose detention started the whole process, who kicked off the 709 crackdown. But in 2017, she was detained on charges of picking quarrels and provoking trouble and fraud. Later in October of last year, she went to trial, but basically she has been unwilling to confess. And so they have not sentenced her, but she's not doing well as far as I know. She's had many health issues. She's in her 60s. She's in detention. So, I think the key takeaway is that, the Chinese system is unique in that the politics and law commissions, the Zhengfa Wei in Chinese, they coordinate between the prosecution, the courts, and the police, and coordinate all of their activities. And so the Communist Party can control all the aspects of the criminal justice system in China. And in politically sensitive cases, human rights lawyers might be able to try to protect their clients, but they run a tremendous amount of risk in doing so. But they've been courageous. They are continuing to do their work. And so I think that, the international community should continue to support, Chinese lawyers, Hong Kong lawyers, and continue to pay a lot of attention to the criminal justice system in China. Obviously, this is the world's second largest economy. Xi Jinping, the president, who will probably be president for life, has said he wants a rule of law society. So we really need to pay attention to the situation for the rule of law in China and Chinese human rights lawyers. So thank you for your time.